Good morning. We'll be starting up in about 2 minutes. Good morning. We're going to be starting up in just a little over a minute. Let everybody sign in. You're going to want to open up your chat pod and your Q&A pod, and then we will be using the poll EV system for getting us some interaction this morning. So good morning, and welcome to another one of our Foundational Why webinars. My name is David Orr. I'm the director here at the New York LTAP Cornell Local Roads Program. And thank you for joining us this morning. We're going to be talking today about employees, finding, retaining, and motivating them. And hopefully the heating system they're putting in my house doesn't make too much noise, but we'll get that all worked out. So just a couple of reminders for folks. If you can get to the next slide, Amanda. Make sure you open up your settings at the bottom, check your audio, check your chat, make sure that's open. That's where we're going to put the handout for today. There's a link so you can download the Poll Everywhere stuff. And we will be using the Q&A, raising hands, maybe, things like that, okay? So this is one of our Why webinars. You can see the next 5 on this slide right here. Some of them are worth professional development hours. This one is not. The March 15 one might be, but we don't have it for sure yet. We'll see. All depending on New York State's rules for that kind of stuff for professional development hours. But we'll be doing those through the end of that last one on March 15th, and then we'll be doing our regular workshops after that. But today we're going to be talking about employees. So let's do a bit of a welcome. Welcome everybody here. And so on the next slide, you'll see a logo. Now that logo is the fact that LTAP, which we're one of 51 centers. Whoop, went too far. There we go. We're one of 51 centers. We're one in every state in Puerto Rico, and there's actually some PTAP centers serving the tribal folks around the country. They're actually about to reestablish that with 7 centers around the country. We've been around for 40 years. And so as we were putting this webinar together, we actually reached out to colleagues, and we're today going to have 2 colleagues, one from Ohio, the Victoria Beale, who's the director there, and one from Kansas, Emily Wilder. I'll let you tell them a little bit about themselves a little more when they get started. But just want to do a quick introduction to why we're here. And so just as a reminder, by the way, the Poll EV is going to be Poll EV CLRP for NYSLTAP, but we'll put that in the links as well. Your most valuable resource is your employees. They are the people that manage everything, but you got to have good employees to make it work. Now, we did a survey last year, as we do annually, looking at employee issues, and there's some things we learned, and there's a couple I want to point out. The first one is, what's the hardest positions to fill? And so there'll be a pie chart that's going to pop magically on screen. And you're going to see a pie chart showing the hardest jobs to fill within the department. And as you can see, people, equipment operators, especially skilled ones, mechanics, laborers, actually a pretty important position. A good laborer can help you a lot. Over half of the positions that people said were hard to fill came from that particular category. The other problem that comes into place, even when you hire somebody, as you see on the next slide, there's challenges, no matter who you hire. And in this case, people got to vote for everything. So pay, you know, well over 50% of folks said pay was an issue, and that, we know that's an issue, especially in public sector. Attitude, 40% said there were issues with attitude. Getting skilled personnel, 90% almost of the problem. And then there were a bunch of other issues that came up, but there's challenges when you have new hires. So what we're going to do is we're going to hear from Victoria and Emily some ways to find, retain, and motivate your employees. But to help them out, I'm going to help us out by saying who you work for and some other introductory questions so we know who's in the audience. So start with polev.com/CLRP for NYSLTAP and start helping us figure out who's in the room today. So we've got about, vary some, but about 40% from towns or townships for Emily and Victoria. You know the word township better. About a quarter of you county, some city and village folks, that's great, and then some state and federal folks as well. And we even have a few private, that's good to know. Okay, so that helps a lot. And the next thing is, what's your job? Are you an administrator? Are you the highway superintendent or DPW commissioner? You an engineer? You in the field crew? Okay, which could include the crew supervisors. Are you a board member, you know, town supervisor, something like that? Or you can, of course, do the none of the above. If you are doing none of the above, do us a favor and throw your title into the Q&A, just so we can see what kind of titles we're dealing with for those who are not in one of those other categories. That helps us quite a bit, okay? So again, about 25% commissioners, engineers, and then a bunch of none of the aboves, and we'll see what a few pop up here in the Q&A. Town supervisor, another LTAP director, things like that. Now, how long have you been there? Now, this will be fun to see how long people have been there. So there's some lessons to be learned. We have a few over 20 years, about a quarter of you each in 5 to 10 and 11 to 20, and a couple of new folks. Yeah, okay. So some people are learning what light switches are. Some are trying to figure out when's retirement coming up. So that should help Victoria and Emily quite a bit. And then, of course, where are you located? We know this one has been marketed around, not just here in New York State, but all over. So let's see where you're from. I know in New York, it's a tiny little area, and most of you are going to be from here in New York State, but do the best you can with the clicking on the dots. And yeah, we got quite a bit of you all over New York State. That's good to see. Got a few from Iowa, a couple from New England. Okay, that's cool to see. Okay. And a couple of you are out on a boat in the Atlantic Ocean. Hopefully they'll let you dock here soon. Okay. So 2 other introductory things that should help out real quick. Are you having issues finding, retaining, and motivating your employees? And you should be able to click on all 3. So which ones are you having the most issues with? We'll see if it does that. It looks like it might only be doing 1. I'm not sure. But obviously, this is an issue for everybody. Finding the employees is a big thing, retaining them, and then, of course, motivating them as well. So what are you hoping to get out of today's webinar? This will be a text wall, so you can type in your words, and it should show up. We'll just get some answers, and then we'll go ahead and get started with our first of our 2 guest instructors today. The first one will be Victoria Beale from Ohio, and then motivation will be Emily Wilder from Kansas. We're looking today for guidance, increasing employee morale, okay? Just some ideas. Yep, that's what we're trying to do. Give you some ideas, some foundational stuff to help you as you move forward. There is a handout, by the way, that goes with this. If you want to see the handout with some of the suggestions, some links, some references, open up the chat pod and you can click and you can download that handout, which should be useful for you later on, okay? Best practices, okay, cool. So we're looking for ideas. Please feel free to answer them on. We're going to have lots of polls that we're going to be doing through the course of the day. So now we're going to switch it over to Victoria Beale, who is with the Ohio LTAP Center, and I'll let her introduce herself and take it away, Victoria.
Good morning. Thank you, David. I'm so happy to be here with everyone this morning. This is a topic that I know in Ohio we have been aggressively addressing or attempting to address with the Great Resignation of 2021. It has really impacted the agencies and their ability to find employees. We have, during our recent snow and ice events, experienced, having fewer trucks out on the roads because of the ability to find qualified CDL drivers, combined with, the COVID virus and needing to quarantine people who actually had the virus during the snow and ice event. So hopefully, I'll get you some ideas to help you with finding employees, not only in the short term, but in the longer view as well. I'm Victoria Beale, as David said, with the Ohio LTAP Center. And my background is I do have a bachelor's degree in human resource management. And I have my JD, which is a law degree, and with a concentration in labor and employment law. I hold 2 HR certifications from the 2 main HR organizations that provide those. So I do have, as they would say, the credentials in this area, and it's something that I'm very passionate about, and I definitely keep up on, in addition to the training program that I manage here in Ohio. So let's go on to the next screen. All right, my main thing I want to talk to you about first is you need to do some work and be ready to find employees. Because one of the things that I find a lot of times when, an employer or an agency has a position that has become vacant is that they have failed to document what's going on with that position, and that they really need to have some base work done with the position before they can even look at posting it. So if we can go on to the next screen. Do you know what your position does? If you could just click through 3 times for me, great. And these are the things I want to talk to you about as far as when you need to be ready. And this legwork actually, what I like to do, at least in my center, and I recommend to people, especially with the first 2, is to look at those annually when you're doing your performance evaluations. Make sure you have up-to-date job descriptions for your employees, and also look at, your operating or your guidebooks. It doesn't have to be an instruction manual bound with tabs like you see on the left side of the screen here. Something as simple as a one pager that explains, how the phone system works, or, a one pager that explains how a certain process that that position needs to do works is really, really important. We had benefit of using those documents recently as we had our registrar position. The individual who was in that spot, she unfortunately had to take some leave time, and luckily we had the documents, and we were able actually to slide a master's degree intern into the spot, and with the guidance that the employee who had to be out had created, this master's degree intern was able to pick up and run with those documents. And really, we didn't miss a beat in our operations with registering people and hosting classes because of the documents that were there. So I think it's critically important. And like I said, this is something, when I first came into the LTAP Center, we didn't really have any of those documents. So we went through and built them. And now when we do our annual performance evaluations, or when a new process comes in place, we relook at those documents to make sure that things are up to date, because life is uncertain and you never know when you're going to need to have somebody step in and cover for someone else, let alone have to hire for a position. Another thing that I think is critically important as you're looking at these documents is to make sure that you're not putting requirements in for the position that aren't directly tied to that position. And the reason I say this is that in the HR world, there are 2 types of discrimination. One of them is called disparate impact. And that's where, you unintentionally say that a position has certain requirements when they aren't directly linked to the work that that position's doing. And those requirements then can unintentionally exclude a whole category of individuals, especially protected classes. So if this is an unfamiliar term to you, hopefully you have an HR person you can reach out to and speak with. Here at our DOT, this is where our physical abilities testing really had to be scrutinized hard. We had physical ability testing that was set up for our highway technician positions, because we wanted to ensure that individuals being hired into those positions could lift and tote, a certain amount of weight. But we wanted to make certain that those requirements weren't going to unintentionally discriminate against any specific protected class. And when you talk about this area, there's also another term that comes up, and it's position-specific minimum qualifications, PSMQ. And there is an example out there, and it's very rare that you actually have a position-specific minimum qualification that can be approved that does, in essence, discriminate against a protected class. But the traditional or the classic example that they always brought up when I was in law school was firefighters. And firefighters have to have a mask that fits, and suctions against their skin, their face. But there is a skin condition which is traditionally found in the African American community that can cause that type of mask not to fit firmly against the face. I don't know if there's been any recent improvement in the masks. As I said, this is a classic example, but that's such a critical position-specific minimum qualification, because if you're entering a burning building, you need to be able to have oxygen. That they upheld that position-specific minimum qualification for firefighters, even though it does, have a disparate impact on a specific protected class, which is race. So those are very, very rare. So make sure that whatever you're setting up on your job description for minimum qualifications for a position, educational levels, prior knowledge, that you're working through that and vetting it through an HR person. Okay, if we can go to the next screen, that'd be great. All right, so the next thing I want to talk to you about is you need to be creative in how you are recruiting and advertising. If we can go to the next screen, and this is going to be a poll question. Oh, actually, we'll have the poll question next, sorry. Well, what I wanted to ask was, when is the last time you looked at a newspaper classified ad, a printed newspaper? And we've got some categories there. And the responses are well, kind of coming in. I honestly wasn't expecting any responses for this past Sunday, but again, everybody, I guess, does things differently in their worlds. I know in my world that it's probably been well over 10 years since I've had a print Sunday newspaper in my hands and actually looked at the classified ads. So, I would say that if this was a chart that was being populated by folks who were millennials or Gen Z or digital natives, that we would see a skew towards the 10 years or more. I probably would have even had to put in a category that said I've never looked at a classified ad. But think about the generations that are out there. And if we can go to the next screen now, that'll be great. And think about, how they get their information, how they're looking for positions. And really the way they're looking for it is online for the majority of them. So thank you for populating that. Folks are putting names in of different online job posting boards. That's awesome. So I appreciate what you're putting in there. And some of you said none, you're not branching out into that job posting board area, which is something I would encourage you to take a look at. If you're not comfortable digging into it, talk to a colleague at another agency about how they're doing it. We learn best, I find, from each other and from our connections. So if we can go on to the next screen. One of the things I wanted to talk about with these job posting boards, and I'm not endorsing the 3 logos that are up here, I just wanted to talk to them about them in general, is that they are national job posting boards. And, while it definitely helps to get your job out there, you can end up with a huge number of applications that just really don't fit the bill for what you're looking for, especially if you're an agency that doesn't offer a relocation budget. So, I would encourage you, and if we can go to the next screen, to look a little closer to home. And there's, I believe, four different, yep, thank you for putting my bullets up. You can look at different ways of advertising. And I find, at least here in Ohio, our APWA chapters are very active. And again, I'm not endorsing any specific association, but um, there's an email that comes out a minimum of once a week with all the job postings for just the central Ohio area, let alone the statewide postings. And then on a national level, national APWA, they put job postings out as well. So that can be a much more targeted area where you can post your positions. You also, I would encourage you reach out to STEM high schools, career centers in your areas. Universities have recruiting offices that help, degree candidates and people who have graduated already find positions. Um, you know, your local job centers, I'm not certain what they call them in New York State, but we have job centers here in every county in Ohio. And, it's very easy. It's just a phone call to post your position with them. So look much closer to home for your job postings, especially if you don't have a relocation budget. And then another thing, and let's go to the next screen, look for community job posting resources. Where is this demographic group that you have hanging out? When I've looked for positions, prior to entering the public sector, when my previous career, I would look at where people who would apply for the types of positions I had open would hang out, and I would go post these positions up. I'd post them at the grocery store, on the community posting board, where people go to, maybe the bowling alley. I mean, different places, just getting the word out that the position's available, and any type of free posting area, can really help with your applicant flow. All right, let's go ahead and go to the next screen. The next thing is, finding your employees doesn't just actually happen when you need them. And this is something that I think is really, really important. So on the next screen, we should have a poll. Where is it that you network? And when I say network, don't think of like a happy hour cocktail thing. Think about when it is you're talking to people who are in your area, your discipline. How are you networking? Do you keep in touch with other public officials? LinkedIn's a great one. Yep. Are you talking to adjoining jurisdictions? Are you going to LTAP courses in New York or other states and talking to the other participants who are in those courses? There's a lot of different ways. Conferences, absolutely. You guys have an excellent bridge conference there in New York State. Be networking, and if we can go to the next screen, my thing is you need to always be recruiting. You need to make certain that not only are you networking, but that you're building your brand. One example I have of this here in the Central Ohio area is our Franklin County engineer, and that's the county where the city of Columbus sits. Cornell Robertson, he does an excellent job of building the Franklin County engineers office brand. And he is continually putting information out on either the Franklin County Engineers Facebook page or in the media, and recognizing his current employees for every single, milestone that they achieve service-wise, recognizing them for excellent work. Like over this weekend when we had this monster storm come through Ohio, they were on the media numerous times acknowledging the snow fighters and, giving them the kudos that they well deserved for the hard work that they put in. But build your brand, because what you want is you want to make yourself an employer of choice. You know, if you are using an online system, you know, does that system notify people when you post a position that matches what they're looking for? I was working with my son last night, who's applying for internships for the summer. And one of the places where he was applying, it had a little checkbox at the bottom. It said, do you want to be notified when other positions of this type are posted? So he checked yes. So next time a civil engineering internship comes up in the system, he'll be notified immediately so he can apply for it. If your system doesn't do that, talk to your HR folks to see if they can find a system that does, or if it's a system, say that, you know, the state owns, you know, talk to them to see if your IT folks can write that into it, because people look for that now. You know, the bottom line is you want to make certain that you have this agency that people want to work for. You want to make people want to work for your agency and with your team. So next screen. I want to caution you though, as you're wanting to make people work for you, is that don't make promises that you can't keep. I mean, at least I know with our agency, final hiring authority rests either with our director or sometimes with the governor's office. So, you know, while we work to build our brand and work to be an employer of choice, we have to be careful when we're talking to people that we don't overpromise. So, you know, in the public sector, hiring is much different than in the private sector. And this is really more of where I'm, you know, speaking today is to public sector. So just be careful, don't overpromise. And then, you know, you'll get that right balance. All right, if we can go on to the next screen. The next topic I'm going to talk to you about is retaining employees. And I'm going to go over a number of items, but I also want to say that, you know, it's really critically important that, you know, you listen to Emily's presentation and take that in as well, because retaining employees, you know, the motivation piece is one of, if not, it's important, and it's probably the most important part of retaining employees. So let's go to the next screen. So what does your agency do to help build teams? You know, I know in our agency, we have had deputy directors and administrators who've worked hard to build teams, and social events are one way. You know, we've had annual picnics where we take all the equipment out of the tech services garage, and the administrators and the deputy director cook out for us. Different events, training events, absolutely. If you haven't done like generational communications or, you know, a Myers-Briggs type training, that's where you look at everybody's personality on your team and how you can best interact with each other. You know, special projects, absolutely. Another way that, you know, we try to build the team is to have people work with other individuals that they haven't worked with before, so they get that experience and exposure to them. Yes, you know, you guys have great ideas here. So if we can go to the next screen. One thing I want to talk to you about with the team building, it's critically important, and Emily is going to continue that theme. But for retaining employees, another area you really need to look at is what they call wage compression. And this is a term of art in the HR world. And this is where the starting pay moves up, but you don't move your existing employees' pay up, you know, along with that starting pay moving up. A good example is, you know, there's a local fire department where, you know, in Ohio, our starting pay for minimum wage, our Ohio minimum wage, not the federal minimum wage, but our Ohio minimum wage moved up 50 cents an hour first of the year. And, you know, they looked at their existing employees and moved everybody's pay up 50 cents an hour all across the board, because, you know, when it comes down to it, you know, they understand that it can cost 1.5 to 2 times an annual salary to replace a position. And, you know, you feel that you can't afford that 50 cents an hour. Well, you know, compound that times twice the salary to replace the position. And you guys know the struggle you're going through to find people right now. It's really what it comes to, bottom line is you can't afford to not raise the wages, when you see the bottom of the pay scale moving up. So be in tune with what's going on and make certain that as that bottom of the pay scale is legally moved up, that you look at everybody's pay and do proper adjustments, because you don't want wage compression to happen with your agency. So if we could go to the next screen, I want to know, what other benefits does your agency offer employees? And the reason I'm asking this is that I know with our agency, when I first started here, they used to provide us a statement once a year that gave us not only our annual salary amount, but it showed the cost of all these other items that you guys are putting on the screen. Health insurance, dental, vision, our retirement system here in Ohio is different than paying into Social Security. We have a pension system, so they used to put the cost of the pension on there. If you had taken tuition reimbursement, they'd put that on there to give you an idea of what your complete package is that you're getting, because those other benefits sometimes can cost even more than what you're paying the employee directly. So I want to encourage you, if you don't do that, talk with your payroll folks and talk with your finance folks, and they should be able to run those numbers for you and create a statement. I would imagine if you have all this information in databases, it's just building a report that you can run. And, when you give them their W-2, give them this report that says, oh, by the way, here's all these other benefits that cost as much or more than what we're paying you. So really your annual compensation package is much more than just your base salary. So that's great. Thank you. The next screen, I want to talk about work-life balance. And this is something that especially the younger generations are really, really in tune with. I know that not every position we offer can telecommute. There's no way our snowplow drivers can telecommute. That's just not in the cards. But the pandemic has shown us that there are a whole lot of other positions that can effectively telecommute, that we had never considered before for telecommute. And the younger generations, and actually some of the older ones now that we've been through it, are really in tune with and love this work-life balance benefit. It isn't even so much that, that vision of getting up and throwing some laundry in the washer or dryer, when you take a quick break from what you're doing. Sometimes it's the commute time that they were spending getting to or from the job that they're now getting hours back in their life when they're telecommuting. So that's one of the key factors with the Great Resignation, is that in the HR world, they said that there were so many people who really felt that that was an incredible benefit, that they actually, when employers started calling people back in the office, looked for positions that would allow them to continue to telecommute. For those who can't telecommute, flexible working hours. If you can be flexible with the working hours, and what I also think of there, with organizations starting and end times, allow people a little bit of flexibility too for, arrival or departure with their work times. We all know traffic can be crazy sometimes, or you get stuck in a situation where, there's a congestion. So, if you can set up a system where, it's not that they absolutely have to clock in by 8, but, their arrival time is from maybe 8 to 8:30, if their position will allow it, then that provides more flexibility. But, if you really want to know what the folks who are working for you want as far as flexibility, you need to talk to them. You need to have a conversation, and you don't necessarily have to have it during the performance evaluation time. A lot of the managers in our agency set up time, months after a performance evaluation, to sit down with employees and just talk to them about their work-life balance and see if there's any ideas or things that we can do to help them with that and let them know that they're valued and that we have heard them and that we want to be a partner in creating a better work-life balance. So if we can go to the next screen. One thing I want to remind, especially the public sector agencies, is that we have something available as a benefit that private sector employers do not, and that's comp time. You know, by law, the Fair Labor Standards Act, which was enacted back in the 1930s, it's Depression era legislation, it made it illegal to not compensate certain classes of workers at time and a half over 40 hours in a work week. So as I say that, I think through all the different pieces that could be exceptions to that, such as supervisors. So make sure you're talking with your HR folks so you know exactly which positions are overtime eligible and which ones aren't. But in the public sector, we can actually let them bank those hours and take them later. So essentially for every overtime hour, you know, like our snowplow drivers were out driving this week, they could choose to bank that time up to a certain number of days and then use it later. And they use that at the overtime rate. So for every overtime hour they worked, they can take an hour and a half off later. This is only available to public sector employers because of our budgeting. And it's an exception that was written in the Fair Labor Standards Act. If you're a private employer, if they've worked overtime, you've got to pay them the overtime. You can't let them bank it and take it off later. It just doesn't work that way. But in the public sector, that's a huge benefit. We're able to tap into individuals who are farmers, who use that comp time to plant in the spring and to harvest in the fall. You know, there's a wide group of individuals who really like that idea of having that comp time available to them and don't mind working the 12-hour shifts plowing during the snow or working the longer shifts in the summer, you know, inspecting construction. So because they have the ability then to take that comp time later. So remember, public sector, there's a benefit we have that gives you a leg up. On the next screen. The other thing I wanted to mention, and this goes back to talking to your employees, is that sometimes you can come up with a benefit that ends up being a huge perk that positions you as an employer over and above other employers. And this is an actual policy out for the Washington State DOT that I learned about when I went to a conference about 6 years ago with AASHTO. And what I learned is that they allow for certain positions, which are office-based only. This isn't their snowplow drivers, but their office-based positions, their engineers, other office staff. If they have a new baby, they can bring it into the office for the first year with them. And they said in the history of doing this, they really only had one person that objected, and to their colleague having a baby in the office. And that person, you know, they worked with them to switch some hours around or, you know, switch around where they sat in the office so they wouldn't, you know, be bothered. But other than that one person, you know, everybody else in the office absolutely loved it. It was almost a quasi team building because people would stop by to see how the baby was doing that day. You know, they, you know, really got to know the baby. And, you know, at the end of the year, they had a little first birthday party for the baby. And then it went on to whatever type of care then the parent would arrange after that first year. But, you know, it was a benefit that allowed them to position themselves above other employers in the area. And if you think about it, Washington State, that's where the tech hub is. So they really were working at getting creative to make themselves an employer of choice in that area. So this is just one example. I'm sure that in talking to your employees, you can come up with other great ideas or benefits that you can offer them. But I definitely encourage you, look back at this recording when you feel like you're struggling finding people and revisit some of these recommendations. You know, I don't expect that you're going to go out and do them all right this afternoon, but just work at them bit by bit, and you can get pieces put in place that'll help you be able to both recruit and retain employees. So I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Emily now.
All right, thank you, Victoria. Yeah, and absolutely, motivation is going to be a really big part of retaining employees and helping to bring them into your organization. You know, if you can create these benefits that motivate people to choose you over some of the other options that are available out there, it's really going to help strengthen your employee base. So before I dive in, I'll share a little bit about myself and my background. So I'm Emily Wilder. I'm the director at Kansas LTAP. My background, I have a bachelor's degree in psychology and then a master's in management and leadership. I typically teach a variety of these kind of management soft skill classes. So today we're going to be talking a little bit more in depth about motivation. And what it really comes down to is the why. So motivation is having a strong why, and it's what motivates ourselves and our employees to come to work every day and to do good, high quality work. So we're going to look at a few different ways that as supervisors or as managers, we can help create this why or this motivation for our team. So we're going to talk a little bit more about what I mean with the big why, and then we'll cover extrinsic or motivation that's external, and then we'll talk about intrinsic as well, which is internal. That's okay. Next slide. All right, so the big why. What I mean with this is it's our purpose, it's our mission. Why are we doing this work every day? And we want to be able to answer this question for our employees at 3 different levels. So the first one is at the organizational level. What is the agency's mission or purpose? Why are we here? Why is the work being done important? And so oftentimes you're going to see that in something like a mission statement. And typically in the public works field, it's going to be something related to service, to safety, dedication to the community, things like that. So that's the agency's mission or purpose. And then we have the individual position's purpose. So this is really going to be, why is their job specifically important? How does it serve that bigger purpose? Why was that position ever created? Why do you need it? So for example, a motor grader, their position's mission might be to make sure that unpaved gravel roads are safe to travel on, right? Making sure that there's no loose gravel, there's no issues with sliding out and causing accidents, there's no major potholes or divots in the road that's going to cause an accident. And so it serves that overall agency's mission of improving safety, improving roadway travel for our citizens. And then you have the personal mission. And this one is where it can be a little bit varied. So ideally, we want our personal mission for ourselves and for our employees to be aligned with the agency and the position's mission. The more closely aligned that they are, the more likely they are to stick around. And it seems like we probably have quite a few on this call today where your personal mission is probably going to be aligned with what your agency does. I saw it seemed like 50% or so had been with their agencies for longer than 5 years. And so that speaks to a certain commitment to the principles and the work that's being done. But personal mission can differ, right? So it could be you get out of bed every day because you know you're making an impact in your community, you know that you're out there helping save lives, or it could just be you want to provide for your family. You want health insurance. You want some of the benefits that they offer. You're a farmer and you want some of that comp time that they talked about. So it could be these more external benefits that we'll talk about a bit more, or it could be this really internal. So on the next slide, I've got a little bit of a poll for you. And I want to know, what's your why? For you personally, why do you show up to work every day? Yeah, be honest, paycheck, right? Talk about the elephant in the room there. All right, we've got one at least who enjoys the work. Couple there. Yeah, and this is exactly what we tend to see. We have some people who are there for the paycheck, for the money. Nothing against it. We all need to make a living. We all need to work. We all have bills to pay. And then we have others who are there also because they really have some kind of sense of purpose with it. They really enjoy the work. They really have a sense of responsibility or a dedication to it. And those are typically going to be the employees that are going to be easier to retain because someone else can always offer you a higher paycheck. And that seems to be what we're seeing with a lot of agencies right now. I know in Kansas, I've had people tell me, we can't get anyone, they can go work for Petco and make more. And so that's something to be thinking about. And Victoria covered it a little bit, but if you can't raise salaries, think about some of those other external benefits you can offer to really pull people in. All right. Great answers. Yeah, so let's talk a little bit more about extrinsic motivation. And when I'm saying extrinsic, it really just means external. And so that's a type of motivation that is coming from someone else. It's not coming from within the employee or within yourself. And this is typically the type of motivation that we most commonly use in the workplace, right? So as an employer, we can create this kind of external motivation in the form of rewards. And these are what you typically think of. So salary, benefits, bonuses, promotions, title changes, flexibility in working hours, things like that. Anything that is going to be some kind of external reward that an agency can offer or that you as a supervisor can offer. It could be a gift card, right? It could be anything. Think about back to elementary school, pizza party, things like that, right? These are all external motivators. And in order for external motivation to work, there are some certain conditions that really need to be met. And they're pretty simple. So what it is there is employees need to know that increased effort is going to lead to increased performance. They need to know that that increased performance is going to be seen or noticed and then rewarded. And the last part of it is they actually need to want the reward that's being offered. So for example, a gift certificate to a nice steakhouse might be a great reward for most of your employees, but for the one vegetarian in the group, that's not going to be motivating at all. So the rewards need to be tailored to your employees. And back to what Victoria said, that means talk to them. Find out what it is they want and what is going to be a motivating factor for them. So pretty simple. Talk to your employees. The one caveat I want to mention when it comes to external motivation is you want to make sure that the rewards are wanted, but not too much. There's a tipping point where a reward might be so good that it's all they think about. So research actually shows that if a task requires some thinking, then a larger reward can actually impact performance negatively. What happens is people get so focused on the reward and then they start making some mistakes, they lose sight of the task. And so you want to make sure it's balanced, especially with the work that's being done in public works. You know, there's a higher risk for accidents and injuries. And so you want to motivate your employees, but not have them daydreaming about, you know, a vacation to the Bahamas and then an accident happens. So on the surface, external might seem easier, but you'll find it's maybe a little tricky in practice. All right, and then the opposite of external is intrinsic or internal motivation. Another way to think of intrinsic motivation is it's knowing your own personal why. So this is your purpose. This is what you're driven to do regardless of external rewards. And for example, especially in the public works field, we might see intrinsic motivation being focused on service to the community, saving lives through better safety measures, et cetera. Some of those things that we saw in those responses that came up, right? The ones that weren't just a paycheck tended to be more internally motivated. And the issue with this is I just said this is internal to our employees or to ourselves. So how can we create motivation that's internal to someone else? And luckily, what we can do as supervisors or managers is we can really help create an environment that's right for employees to build their own intrinsic motivation. And we do that by focusing on 3 core factors, and those are variety, impact, and contribution. So variety, it's what it sounds like. It's variety in the job that's getting done. Are they doing the same task day after day after day, or do they have options to do different tasks every day or, you know, every week? Or are they on some kind of schedule where there's a break in the monotony, right? We want to make sure that that people are staying engaged, they're not doing the same task, they're not getting complacent or bored. And then we have contribution and impact. So impact is the final outcome. So for example, public works, maybe our final impact is we are making roads safer, we're saving lives, we're reducing accident casualties. Contribution is, can they see how the work that they do contributes to that final impact, or is there a disconnect? So we want to make sure that we have a very clear final outcome, that people know what it is that we're working towards and what the results of our work are. And then we also want to be able to show them, this is how you contributed. This is what you did that helped produce that final outcome. Okay? And so then those three core characteristics are either multiplied or diminished by autonomy and feedback. So these are going to be some characteristics that are either going to help amplify intrinsic motivation, or if we don't have it, it's going to take a lot of it away. And when we're talking about autonomy, that means that employees have the freedom to determine what they work on or how they work on it. And so a great example of that is those options like telecommuting if it's available, or flexibility in start time, things like that. Anything that gives employees a little bit more power, a little bit more control, and that's also going to help really create ownership of the work that they do. And then feedback is just knowledge of the result. So that could either be feedback from a supervisor or a manager, someone telling them what their results were, or it's something that they can easily track their own progress on. Do they have access to data that lets them know how things are going? So it's in combination, those 5 key points: task variety, contribution, impact, autonomy, and feedback, that are really going to drive intrinsic motivation and employee engagement. And that's really going to also help retain employees as well. Next slide. So I want to do a quick poll here, and I just want to hear what's most encouraged at your agency. Does it tend to be more extrinsic or external motivation, or is there more of a focus on intrinsic? So those things like, do you have variety? Do you have autonomy? Are you getting feedback? Yeah, and this is more so what I would expect to see. Typically, we tend to focus on external rewards rather than creating a space and an environment where people can bring their own internal motivation. So what I would encourage you going forward is to think about, how can you create more variety for your employees? How can you show them the final impact of their work and how they contributed to that? How can you create a little bit more autonomy and give them a little bit more feedback? All of those things are going to help foster intrinsic motivation. All right, next slide. So I'm going to just briefly talk about the XY theory of management. I don't know that we'll have time to watch the video, but it is included on your resource handout. So I do recommend that you watch it. It's about a 7-minute video, and it does a really good job of explaining it. But the main highlight is it's talking about 2 different theories of management. Theory X tends to be more externally focused. It's this kind of concept, a little bit more old school, and I don't want to say traditional, but maybe industrial, where, you know, the boss thinks that employees are inherently lazy, they need to be motivated to do the work, they're not going to do it on their own. And it's really more of a carrot and stick type of philosophy around management, right? Like, I need to either motivate my employees somehow with rewards or punishment to get them to do what I want to do. Theory Y, on the other hand, is a little bit more intrinsically motivated. So it's coming in with the belief that people naturally want to work to a certain extent, right? They want to be able to see progress. They take pride in their work. If you give them the opportunity, they will meet your expectations or exceed those expectations. So it's a very different belief system, one that puts more trust and power into the employees, and the other that's a little bit more carrot and stick approach. So definitely watch that video when you have the time to get a better understanding. But the main takeaway is that we want to make sure that we're using a theory why approach of management. We want to be really trusting our employees, giving them opportunities to shine, creating that environment where they can be more intrinsically motivated. So next slide, I've got just a really short poll. And I just want to hear from the little bit I told you, what's the main approach at your agency? Does it tend to be more theory X, a little bit more old school carrot and stick, or is it more theory Y? Really focusing on creating an environment where employees can have that autonomy to take ownership of their tasks. All right, not quite as much of a difference as intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation, but fairly close. And this is what I've been seeing when I teach classes to folks, is that it seems like we're in a bit of a transition period, right? A lot of people are starting to move from a little bit of the more traditional approaches towards more of a theory Y approach. And so this is something that we're seeing. So I'm not surprised that this is where the numbers kind of are. All right, so I've got one last slide for you, I think, and it's just going to be your recap slide. We can go ahead and move to that. So here are the key takeaways that I want you to leave with when you're thinking about motivation, and that's start with why. Make sure that you answer for your employees, why does your agency exist? Why does the work you do important? Why is it important? Why does their position exist? Why should they show up every day? You know, give them some reasons to care about the work that's being done. You can absolutely use external motivation. There's nothing, I don't have anything against it, but intrinsic motivation is going to be a greater driver. It's going to be more resistant to someone else offering bigger, better rewards. So keep that in mind. Try to foster that intrinsic motivation as best you can. Some great ways to do that are by taking a theory Y approach to management, and then really focusing on creating task variety, showing contribution and impact, and then offering autonomy and feedback to your employees. So that's all I have for you today. If you have any questions, absolutely feel free to email me. Yeah, my email's up there. Perfect. So thank you.
So actually, now's a good time if anybody has any questions for any of us, primarily, obviously, Victoria and Emily. You can put them in.
David, you're very faint.
I'm very faint.
I can't hardly hear you.
You can barely hear me. Well, that happens sometimes.
Now you're muted.
Muted. How's that?
Yes, we can hear you great. Thanks.
Oh, great. Okay. So now's the time to ask questions. Put them in the Q&A. If not, you can always email Victoria or Emily. Their emails are there. And you can always email us at the New York LTAP Center, Cornell Local Roots Program. I wanted to thank the two of them. Did an excellent job, Victoria and Emily, for giving us something on employees, keeping them and motivating, things like that. Just a couple of last slides before we'll let you go. We do have the rest of the Y webinar series coming up through the middle of March. Hope to see you on some of those. And register obviously for our workshops, which are starting shortly after that. And got a question, can we stay on and view the video? Watch the video. That's we might be able to do that. A recording will be available, be put up, and there'll be a link to the video actually, but why don't we do that? There'll be a link, you can watch the video, just click and watch it at your leisure. Victoria and Emily, there was a question. Whatever happened to total quality management, or TQM?
Emily, do you want to take that one?
I was going to defer to you, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I think that in my view, because TQM was really back at the beginning of my career in the early 90s, is that it has really evolved through the years into Malcolm Baldrige criteria. And now we look at lean and the various, the green belt, white belt, black belt. Um, that's something that really is a subject for a whole nother webinar, but it was a great question.
Yeah, TQM has been merged into other things. So a couple more questions. What management level is most important for cultural change, in your opinion?
Yeah, I can take that one. So for a type of change that's going to be cultural, that's going to affect the entire organization, you're going to really need buy-in from the majority, so at every level. But what I would say is it is very difficult, if not impossible, to make any kind of cultural change if the leadership at the top is not on board with it. So you don't want it to be driven and kind of forced by the leadership at the top, but you absolutely need to have them on board if you're going to make any kind of progress.
Yeah, there's a comment in Q&A that matches that. I won't read it all, but the last sentence is good. It says, leadership is the final frontier for an employee. So yeah, you got to definitely work on that kind of motivational item. One last question, then we'll let folks go, and that is, what do you do if you're so short-staffed, you can't do flexible hours, your board won't let you hire more help? Any thoughts or ideas there?
Well, this is Victoria, circle back to the board with information about other ways to, hopefully keep your employees, that wage compression issue. If you can convince the board that they need to make certain that they're keeping the pay scale appropriately updated based on where that lower end of the pay scale is at. And again, a lot of the things that Emily talked about as far as motivation, I mean, we've all worked in environments where there have been pay freezes and hiring freezes, and, we have to look at the other components, I would say, Emily, wouldn't you, as to how to keep our employees that we currently have?
Yes, absolutely. It goes beyond, you can't discount salary and some of those other benefits, especially since so many other companies are getting to the point where they're focusing on that and offering it. But if that's just not an option, you need to really nail down that intrinsic motivation.
And you may have to be creative and look for options that may not be direct. So some of the items that were given today are some pretty good thoughts. Well, with that, it's the top of the hour. Thanks everybody for staying with us. Again, the recording of this will be posted on our website, which you can see there on the page. And a link to that video will also be placed up there too. So everybody have yourself a great day and stay well. Bye-bye.